John Cook, Part 5. John and Lois had given their lives to God and were following his plan. They had spent 3 years preparing to go to South Korea. They were so excited when in 1959, the Cooks and their little son Carrie finally boarded a ship and began their 2-week journey to Busan, North Korea. On Monday nights, John and Lois would teach an English language Bible class for university students. Remember how John chose his name when he was adopted as a child? Now John was given a new name. His Korean name is Koo Yo-han. Yo-han means John, and Koo is the last name Cook in Korean. But Koreans say the last name first. Living in South Korea was very different than living in America. John wrote a letter to his family back home and said, "Opportunities for service are almost limitless." They began teaching classes right away, even though they couldn't speak Korean yet. They were able to tell the people about Jesus by using an interpreter. First, they would speak in English, and then the interpreter would say what they had just said in Korean so the people could understand. The Cooks also went to school during this time. One time, John and Lois went to a small orphanage in Seoul, South Korea. There, they told 20 children the true story of why Christmas is special. John had been an orphan himself and knew that everyone is special to God, even children with no families to care for them. There, in a large room lit by only a few candles and a lantern, the children eagerly listened to the story of Jesus' birth and how he came to die for their sin. John and Lois continued to visit orphanages and teach children about Jesus. Soon, John was able to tell the true story of Jesus in the Korean language without an interpreter. John asked questions after the lesson and was so happy to find that the children had truly understood. They were even able to teach the children a song in Korean. Next, they were able to have their very first Good News Club at a public playground. Then they began going to the small country villages. Hundreds of children were hearing about Jesus. John and Lois trained other teachers to know how to lead Good News Clubs in their homes too. One of the girls would walk 2.5 miles to her club to learn about God. She told her sister about Jesus, and her sister believed in him. Good News Clubs quickly spread all over South Korea. As children learned about Jesus, adults also started to believe in Jesus as their savior from sin too, and the churches grew. All of these were great things, but the Cooks faced some very scary situations too. The first few months John and Lois were in South Korea, something very scary happened. By this time, Carrie was a toddler. One morning, his parents couldn't find him. They searched everywhere in the house, all around the yard, in the open well, and outside the gate. They were terrified. At that time, they could not speak Korean, and there was no telephone to call for help. What do you think they did? They prayed to God. Did God know where Carrie was? Yes, and soon the housekeeper of another missionary couple came to the gate holding little Carrie. He had wandered off and had run 2 blocks up the road. The Cooks were so thankful to God for protecting their little boy. The next year, their second son, Kevin, was born. When he was 4 months old, the Cooks had their second scare in South Korea. Their home was being sprayed for bugs, and somehow baby Kevin swallowed some of the poison and became unconscious. They rushed him to the hospital, where they were told he would die. The missionary doctor tried everything to save him, while the Cooks and other missionary friends stood close by and prayed. Suddenly, John saw one of Kevin's thumbs twitch. They were so excited. Eventually, Kevin recovered completely. Carrie and Kevin and their 2 other brothers, Chris and Kimball, grew up in South Korea. John and Lois spent 25 years preaching the gospel, or the good news about Jesus, to the Korean children. When they first went to South Korea, it was right after the Korean War ended. The children were suffering from the war, from poverty and hunger, and from hopelessness. Many children wandered the streets alone without anyone to care for them. The missionaries in South Korea faced many hard situations: diseases, severe weather, and many robberies. Worst of all, the Korean people often mistrusted and hated people who weren't Korean. God used the Cooks to help the people work through these problems. John and Lois Cook are retired now, but they still travel to South Korea to speak at conferences and to train teachers. Because John and Lois obeyed when God told them to go and tell about Jesus in a faraway land, there are now thousands of Good News Clubs in South Korea. Their work doesn't even stop in South Korea. Many Korean children grew up to be missionaries and have gone out into other parts of the world to start Good News Clubs where boys and girls can hear about how Jesus died for their sin too. What about you? Will you follow God wherever He leads you? You're not grown up yet, but if you've believed on Jesus as your Savior, you can tell others around you about Jesus. You can even learn another language and be able to help more people hear the good news of how Jesus can save them.